Okay, I'm going to go over some of the important points in the Phaedo, the last dialogue that we're going to be covering. If you look on page 97, Socrates, on section 60b, it says, Socrates sat up on the bed, bent his leg, and rubbed it with his hand. And as he rubbed, he said, "What a strange thing that which men call pleasure seems to be, and how astonishing the relation it has with what is thought to be its opposite, namely pain." So Socrates is just making this distinction between pain and pleasure. Strange relationship it has with each other. Every time you have some pain, the pleasure follows. And every time you have some pleasure, the pain follows. Hard to get a hold on this. Just keep that in mind. He just even brought this up. Okay, so moving on. Socrates, there's many different themes that happen in this dialogue. The most important one being is that Socrates is going to prove one of the premises of his earlier arguments. The earlier argument was based on the theory of recollection. Remember, there's three things happening with these dialogues. The first one is Socrates was presented with Meno's paradox. If anybody remembers that. Yeah, Meno's paradox, which was a dilemma by which he posed to Socrates, and he said, well, if you already know something, why would you search? And if you don't know, how would you know when you find it? So therefore, any type of investigation or learning is impossible. That's Meno's paradox. How Socrates countered the paradox was the theory of recollection. Meno's paradox is a dilemma. How you counter a dilemma is by offering an alternative, because every dilemma is an either or, and you're limited to two options. Socrates just gave another option, thereby showing that Meno's paradox was a false dilemma. What was the other option that Socrates showed? Socrates said, hey, learning is recollection. You're just remembering things that you forgot from a past life. That's the theory of recollection. Okay. Now, one of the key premises in that argument is Socrates said that the soul is immortal. So the soul is immortal, it has seen all things. Therefore, when you're learning something, you're not really learning it. You're just conjuring up. You're just remembering something that you forgot. But it's all, this whole argument of recollection is all based on the idea that the soul is immortal. And so that's what he needs to prove still. So Socrates has to show that the soul is immortal, which is what he's going to do in this dialogue. Okay. Now, like I said, he goes through a bunch of different themes here. Like on page 99, he deals with suicide. But we're going to get to some of his main arguments concerning the soul. He gives several arguments for the immortality of the soul, but we're just going to concentrate on one of them. On page 116, Socrates says, in Stephanus section 78b through c, he says, we must then ask ourselves something like this: what kind of thing is likely to be scattered? On behalf of what kind of thing should one fear this? And for what kind of thing should one not fear it? We should then examine to which class the soul belongs, and as a result, either fear for the soul or be of good cheer. And then he goes on, here's the important part. Is not anything that is composite and a compound by nature liable to be split up into its component parts? And only that which is non-composite, if anything, is not likely to be split up. So if something is compound, like this, I could split this up, right? I could split this up and like pretend this is a rock or something, compound. I could split it up into a bunch of different parts if it's compound. But what if it's not compound? What if it's not, what if it is non-composite? Can you split it up? Is it capable of being split up? And of course the answer is no. If something is not composite, you can't split it up. And so if we look on what Socrates is going to say is that the forms are non-composite. You can't split these things up. What's a form? A form are the ideas that you have. So you have an idea of justice. You have an idea of love. You have an idea, I mean, it can even be of a physical thing. You have an idea of a chair. All of these ideas are non-composite. You cannot split. Think about it. Think about your idea of a chair right now. Can you split that into pieces? Your idea itself, the idea. Okay, but you may get a little confused here and you start mixing up your image of a chair. And you say, well, the chair has parts and all this stuff. But the idea itself is non-composite. You can't split it up. Well, but if that one's too hard for you, think of the idea of love. Like you love your mother, you love your wife. Is your idea of love, can you split that into parts? Of course not. These are non-composite. Your forms, the ideas you have in your mind, they are non-composite. They are not capable of being divided. Okay, they're simple in this respect, is what we say. This is what he says on section D, page 117. Can the equal itself, the beautiful itself, each thing in itself, the real, ever be affected by any change whatever? Or does each of them that really is, being uniform by itself, remain the same and never in any way tolerate any change whatever? No, they don't tolerate change. What does tolerate change? Things that you can see. This is why he says, what of the many beautiful particulars, by they mean horses, clothes, or other such things, or the many equal particulars, and all those which bear the same name as those others, do they remain the same or in any total contrast to those other realities? One might say, never in any way remain the same as themselves or in relation to each other. So visible things change. Okay, those things do change. I mean, my marker here will change. You put it in the sun, it's going to deteriorate. All right, but my idea of a marker doesn't change. If I have the right idea of it, it won't change. Okay, it doesn't change. If you have if your idea is that of the essential definition. So what does Socrates say next? Section 79. These latter you could touch and see and perceive with the other senses, but those that always remain the same can be grasped only by the reasoning power of the mind. They are not seen but are invisible. Okay, so your ideas cannot be seen. That's why it's hard for you when I start saying, hey, what's your idea of justice, love, and all that? Are they divisible? And I mean, it's hard to grasp, right? To even think about them being divisible or to being non-composite or composite. That's because they're invisible. Okay, so even with chair, when I say your idea of a chair and a chair pops in your mind, that chair that pops in your mind, that little image you see in your mind, in your head, that is not the idea. The idea is invisible. The idea is that by which you know that little thing, that little picture you see in your mind. The idea is that by which you know that thing is a chair. Okay, so you could think of a red chair, blue chair, green chair. It is your idea by which you know all those things are chairs. Okay, your idea is invisible. All right? It is that by which we know physical things or physical images in our mind. So the forms are immaterial. That's what we need to come to grips with right now. These things right here, these ideas we have, they are not divisible. In other words, they can't be broken apart. These forms, these are forms or ideas. Okay? They're not divisible. And if they're not divisible, that means they can't be physical. Because all physical things can be divided. Okay? So they must be immaterial. They must be. Now, let's see. Now, here's where he's going to give his position on the soul. On page 118, section D. But when the soul investigates by itself, it passes into the realm of what is pure, ever-existing, immortal, and unchanging. And being akin to this, it always stays with it whenever it is by itself and can do so. It ceases to stray and remains in the same state as it is in touch with things of the same kind. And experience then is what is called wisdom. So when the soul investigates, listen, another word for the soul, another word for soul is mind. So when your mind is thinking about the forms, which is always, it is going beyond this realm, this material realm that we have right here. Okay? Your mind is coming into contact with the forms, which are immaterial. Okay, so this is a different realm than everything you see before you right now. When your mind goes to this other realm and it comes into contact with these forms, what must that say about the mind? He says right here, but when the soul, the mind, investigates by itself, it passes into the realm of what is pure, ever-existing, immortal, and unchanging. And being akin to this, so your mind must be akin to this. Akin to what? Akin to the forms. Or else it could not grasp the forms. There's a principle here. Something that is received must be in the mode of the receiver. Okay? If you have, like, say, a bunch of sardines, and then you have a circular can, and you have a bunch of sardines, too much to even go in the can maybe, and you stuff them in there. What form must the sardines take in order to get in the can? They must also become circular in the way that the can is. Whatever is received must be in the mode of the receiver. If the mind receives these forms, and the forms are immaterial, what does that say about the mind? Listen, these things the mind has to be capable of receiving the forms. This means that whatever is receiving these forms, whatever it is by which you right now, you have ideas going through your mind, you have an idea of a computer, idea of a human being, you have idea of love, all this stuff, whatever ideas you have, something is in your head. There's something going on in your mind that must be capable of accepting and receiving these ideas. And whatever it is, Socrates is calling it the soul, it must be immaterial. It can't just be physical. Because if it was, listen, does this even make any sense to you? Like, say I got this marker right here. This marker is physical. Does this marker know what love is? Does your hand, just your hand, like your physical hand, does it know what love is? Does your coffee cup know what justice is? Listen, some people say that the the mind and the brain are the same thing. In other words, the brain, just this physical thing, is where we get the ideas. Socrates is saying that's impossible. Okay? Because the forms are immaterial. It cannot just be the brain, a physical brain, that comprehends or understands these forms. Because if it's just a physical thing, it cannot receive the forms. Because that which is received must be in the mode of the way of the receiver. Just like this marker, because it's just purely physical, it will never understand these forms. You'll never understand. This marker is never going to have its own ideas. Well, you may say, well, the brain has electricity in there. Well, if you get some, like a battery charger, and you hook it up to this marker, is it going to start like producing understanding ideas? Doesn't even make any sense. This is what Socrates is saying. Something purely physical cannot understand, cannot receive things that are not physical. Okay? A rock, well, you could talk to a rock all you want. It's never going to understand you. You are communicating ideas that are immaterial. And the only thing that understands immaterial ideas must also be immaterial. This is the basis for Socrates' argument that the soul is immortal. Because if your mind or your soul, by which you understand the forms, is immaterial, then does it decay? What decays? Physical things decay, like your body. When you die, your body's going to decay. It's going to start decaying before that. You're going to get old. Because it's physical. But if your mind is immaterial, does it decay? No. Immaterial things don't decay. They're not divisible. They don't change. So if it doesn't decay, it doesn't change, that means it's immortal. It will live forever. It will be around forever. This is Socrates' his proof, his argument for showing that theory of recollection, the premise is true, right? And backs up that theory of recollection that he gave earlier.